explanation. Welcome back to Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. In Cairo tonight, there's a rare word echoing through the halls of diplomacy: progress. For the first time in months, representatives from Israel and Hamas have sat across the same table, speaking through mediators, negotiation described by Egyptian officials as constructive and positive. But behind every diplomatic smile lies the weight of decades of blood, mistrust, and shattered ceasefires. The question is this the start of something new, or just another fragile pause before the next storm? Quick context snapshot: the Gaza war has entered yet another exhausting chapter. Thousands dead, millions displaced, and an entire region caught in a perpetual cycle of retaliation and reprisal. Over the past week, mounting international pressure, particularly from Washington, Doha, and Cairo, has pushed both Israel and Hamas into face-to-face negotiations in Egypt. These talks mark the first formal attempt at a comprehensive ceasefire framework since the latest escalation began months ago. The stated goal is simple yet monumental: a sustained cessation of hostilities, the return of hostages, and the opening of humanitarian corridors for Gaza's trapped civilians. Egypt, hosting the negotiations, has taken the familiar role of mediator, walking a diplomatic tightrope between Israeli security concerns and Palestinian humanitarian demands. The talks come after weeks of indirect messaging, and now cautious optimism hangs in the air. But optimism in Middle Eastern diplomacy, easily declared, rarely achieved. The immediate event, the first day of negotiations in Cairo, began under intense security. Delegations from both sides arrived separately, escorted by Egyptian intelligence teams and guarded by layers of secrecy. On one side, the Israeli delegation, composed of senior officials from the Shin Bet and the Prime Minister's office, entered with clear instructions: secure the release of remaining hostages and ensure Hamas cannot rearm under any truce. On the other, Hamas's political representatives, not its military commanders, came with their own message: the blockade must end, and Gaza's people must be allowed to breathe again. Egyptian mediators described the discussions as focused and serious. Sources familiar with the talks said that for the first time, both sides agreed to a draft framework, a potential three-phase plan. Phase 1, an immediate pause in fighting to allow humanitarian aid and prisoner exchanges. Phase 2, a monitored truce under Egyptian and Qatari supervision. Phase 3, a longer-term political dialogue aimed at addressing the deeper conflict. None of this is binding yet, but the mere acceptance of structure, after so much chaos, has been seen as progress. Still, the challenges remain colossal. Israel insists on retaining military freedom to strike terror targets during any truce. Hamas demands an absolute cessation of strikes before it releases the hostages. In between them, Egypt's diplomats are playing translator not only of language, but of intent. As one Egyptian official reportedly said off the record, everyone says they want peace, but they all mean different things when they say it. That tension between peace as an idea and peace as a political transaction defines the fragility of these early talks. Historical and political context: to understand the magnitude of this moment, it helps to step back. The Israel-Hamas conflict didn't begin this year, or even this century. It's the latest iteration of a struggle that stretches back to the founding of Israel in 1948 and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. The rise of Hamas in the late 1980s, born from the First Intifada, reshaped Palestinian politics. It introduced a militant resistance movement that rejected Israel's legitimacy outright, positioning itself against the more diplomatic Palestinian Authority. Since Hamas seized control of Gaza in 2007, the enclave has been under Israeli bloc, with intermittent wars erupting every few years: 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and now the latest and deadliest round. Each war ends the same way: a ceasefire mediated by Egypt or Qatar, a brief calm, and then another spark. But this time, the geopolitical context is shifting. Israel faces mounting international scrutiny for the scale of destruction in Gaza. Its Western allies, particularly the United States, are under pressure from global audiences and domestic divisions to push for restraint. Meanwhile, Hamas, though weakened militarily, still holds strategic leverage: the hostages and the symbolic claim of resistance. Behind the scenes, regional actors are recalibrating their positions. Egypt seeks to reassert its role as the region's peace broker. Qatar funds reconstruction and maintains channels with Hamas. Saudi Arabia, cautiously pursuing normalization with Israel, now watches from the sidelines, wary of appearing complicit in Gaza's suffering. The broader Arab world, once unified by the Palestinian cause, is now split between realpolitik and rhetoric. Explanation, and in that fragmented landscape, every negotiation is more than a local dispute. It's a reflection of regional strategy, alliances shifting beneath the surface, global reactions when the first reports emerged of positive talks in Cairo. Global capitals responded with tempered enthusiasm. In Washington, the U.S. State Department issued a statement calling the negotiations a vital first step towards sustainable calm. Privately, explanation, officials acknowledge that Egypt's mediation gives Washington political cover, allowing the U.S. to encourage peace without directly negotiating with Hamas, which it designates as a terrorist group. European governments echoed similar sentiments. France, Germany, and the UK constructive progress, but warned that words must lead to verifiable de-escalation. At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the Cairo talks as a faint but necessary light in an otherwise dark landscape. The Security Council remains divided, with veto politics freezing any enforceable resolution. In the Arab world, reactions were mixed. Qatar, which has been central to back-channel communication, called the talks encouraging. Jordan urged immediate humanitarian relief. Iran, however, dismissed the negotiations as distraction from occupation crimes, signaling its disapproval of any truce that might weaken the narrative of armed resistance. Meanwhile, ordinary civilians in Gaza, in Israel, and across the region watch with quiet exhaustion. For them, positive doesn't mean peace. It means maybe a night without airstrikes, maybe an hour of power, maybe a chance to find family under rubble. Diplomacy moves in statements and press releases. But life and death continue in real-time. Economic and strategic stakes beyond the immediate human toll. The conflict's continuation carries immense economic and strategic consequences. For Israel, the prolonged war is straining its economy. The cost of mobilization, international criticism affecting investment confidence, and the disruption of trade routes have created a quiet pressure within its own political establishment. Tourism has collapsed, inflation is rising, and the global perception of Israel, once defined by technological prowess and security precision, is now overshadowed by images of urban devastation. For Hamas, Gaza's economy is shattered beyond recognition, infrastructure destroyed, industries flattened, and unemployment soaring above 70%. The humanitarian crisis reached proportions unseen since 2014, with the United Nations warning that Gaza is on the brink of becoming uninhabitable. Yet, beneath the humanitarian tragedy lies a strategic chessboard that extends far beyond Gaza. Egypt's stability depends on preventing Gaza's chaos from spilling across its border. Qatar's diplomatic credibility hinges on its ability to broker results through dialogue. And the United States, balancing its alliance with Israel and its credibility with Arab partners, faces growing domestic dissent that questions unconditional support for Israel's actions. The energy markets are also watching closely. While Israel's offshore gas production has remained largely stable, any escalation risks regional energy infrastructure, including pipelines passing through Egypt and Jordan. For Europe, still adjusting to post-Ukraine energy realignment, any instability in the eastern Mediterranean threatens diversification plans meant to reduce reliance on Russian gas. Even global trade feels the ripple. Recent months have seen disruptions in the Red Sea, with Houthi attacks on shipping routes tied indirectly to the Gaza conflict, raising insurance costs and global shipping delays. Thus, the Cairo talks are not just about Gaza, they're about regional balance, economic survival, and the credibility of diplomacy in a world growing skeptical of it. Possible futures, what comes next depends on choices made in rooms few will ever see. But three broad scenarios emerge from this moment. Scenario 1, de-escalation. In this path, Egypt and Qatar succeed in bridging the trust gap. Israel agrees to a phased truce, Hamas releases the remaining hostages, and humanitarian aid flows freely into Gaza under international supervision. In time, the truce could evolve into a more durable ceasefire, paving the way for political negotiations, perhaps even in direct recognition of a unified Palestinian Authority that can represent both Gaza and the West Bank. This scenario would require political courage and a recalibration of strategy from both sides. Scenario 2, limited conflict. The more likely short-term outcome, a temporary pause allows aid and prisoner exchanges, but deeper issues remain unresolved. Fighting resumes intermittently, enough to keep the region unstable but short of full-scale war. Egypt continues mediating, Qatar funds reconstruction, and the world watches another cycle of destruction and reconstruction unfold. In this outcome, diplomacy survives, but peace remains elusive, a holding pattern, not a solution. Scenario 3, escalation. The most dangerous path. Talks collapse, hostilities intensify, and regional actors get drawn in. Backed militias across Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen activate in coordination, widening the conflict scope. Israel responds with broader military operations, explanation, while domestic unrest grows within neighboring states. Explanation, the conflict ceases to be about Gaza alone. It becomes a regional confrontation with unpredictable consequences. Each scenario carries its own logic, its own cost. Explanation, the tragedy of this conflict is that all three have felt, at different times, equally inevitable. Tension peak and big question. The first day of talks in Cairo ended with smiles for the cameras and silence behind closed doors. A joint statement described the dialogue as positive and constructive. But positive can mean many things in diplomacy. Sometimes it simply means no one walked out. This is the razor's edge of Middle Eastern negotiation, where every word is calibrated, every gesture measured. Progress is fragile, trust microscopic. And yet, history shows that breakthroughs often begin this way, quietly, with fatigue rather than triumph. As night falls over Cairo, the delegates return to their guarded hotels. Outside, journalists speculate, analysts debate, and families on both sides hold on to the thinnest strand of hope. Explanation. The question that lingers isn't whether peace is possible. It's whether either side, after so much loss, still believes it's worth the risk to try. Explanation. The Cairo talks have their first day not in failure, but in possibility. That alone marks a small human victory. A reminder that dialogue, no matter how fragile, remains the only bridge out of endless war. In the coming days, in those closed-door meetings could redefine not only the future of Gaza and Israel, but the credibility of diplomacy itself in an age of polarization. Because in the end, wars may begin with rockets, but they end, if they ever do, with words. You've been watching Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. Stay curious, stay informed. And until next time, keep your eyes open to the world unfolding beyond the noise.